So, today we will be discussing plastic freedom. So, just learning a bit more about plastic pollution and the ways in which we can help to reduce our own plastic waste. And then there will be some tips at the end, and we'll also have time for questions as well. So, here is just a brief agenda about what we are going to run through today. So, we've got a bit about the harmful impact of plastic. So, what happens to our plastic when we throw it away? We've then got a section about microplastics, so what they are and also how they can affect our ecosystem. We'll then go on to how we can kind of fight against this plastic pollution issue, and what we can be doing to kind of help that. Then there will be a bit about the industry and what they're doing to help, and also what us at Compass are doing as well. And then there will be a little section on what you personally can do to reduce your wastage and also swaps to make. And then there will be some take home messages at the end. So, just a quick stat to begin with. So, when we're talking about the harmful impact of plastic, so did you know that UK households throw away an estimated 1.7 billion pieces of plastic each week, which is a phenomenal amount if you think about it. So, that does equate to about 60 pieces per household per week. So, all that plastic that you're buying and throwing away, it's got to end up somewhere. So, that's kind of what we'll go into a bit today. But yeah, I just thought I would start with that big stat. So, what happens to our plastic? So, each year in the UK, about 400 million tonnes of plastic is produced. So then out of this 400 million tonnes, only half of it is designed to be used more than once. So about 200 million tonnes of it are being used and then thrown away straight away. So that's a large percentage that is going to waste, and it's not being recycled, it's not being reused. So then out of the remaining 50%, only 10% of that is recycled. So it kind of just puts into perspective the vast quantities of plastic which are being produced and how little of it is being recycled. So just some effects about plastic pollution. So it's thought that greenhouse gases coming from plastic production are expected to reach over 56 gigatons by 2050. So again, this is huge numbers that we're dealing with. And to put that into perspective, that's about 10 to 23% of the world's entire remaining carbon budget. So that's a large proportion from plastic production. And the issue with plastic pollution is it ends up clogging up our landfills. It can then leach into the ocean, and it's combusted into toxic smoke. So it's thought that around 1 in 2 marine turtles have eaten plastic, and 90% of seabirds have plastic in their stomachs. So it's not only affecting our oceans and our rivers, but it's also affecting wildlife as well. So it's estimated that around 19 to 23 million tonnes of plastic ends up in our lakes, rivers and seas. And just to put that into perspective, it's thought by 2050 there could be more plastic in the sea than fish. So that's just something for you to imagine there. So yes, plastic is a very big issue, and especially its pollution. So if it's not being discarded properly or not being recycled, then this is where sadly it is ending up. So next, I thought we would talk about microplastics because they are quite a big contributor to the issue of plastic pollution. So some of you might be aware of what microplastics are, and some of you might have not heard of them at all. So that's fine. I've got some definitions and explanations of what microplastics actually are. So microplastics are pieces of plastics which are less than about 5 millimeters in diameter. So very, very small amounts. So almost like half of your baby fingernail. So they're tiny, tiny pieces of plastic, and they can be split up into primary and secondary microplastics. So primary microplastics are those which have been deliberately made in those small quantities. So these are things like microfibers from clothing, microbeads, and also plastic pellets. So these have deliberately been manufactured to be this size. Secondary microplastics are things like plastic bags or plastic bottles, packaging from food, packaging from clothing, deliveries, things like that. So what happens with these is they then end up being broken down. And most of the microplastic waste which ends up in the environment is actually from secondary microplastics. So that's when plastic bags get broken down. And sadly, microplastics are practically impossible to remove, and they'll remain in water for hundreds or thousands of years. So this is like a really large scale issue. And yes, obviously the issue with them not being able to break down is that they remain in our environment. So once they're in our environment and in our ecosystems, they can then get into our water and soil. So there's lots of different ways that this can happen. It might be through direct littering, so people just dropping their rubbish on the ground, not recycling it, not even putting it into bins. You've then got wastewater and surface runoff. So this is things like from agricultural land or also from roads. So these kind of end up leaching into our soil and also then into our rivers. You've also got wind, so this could be rubbish being blown around. Perhaps it's in a recycling plant, but it's blown out if the wind's very strong. So yeah, wind is another way in which microplastics can get into our water and soils. And then also fishing and shipping. So this could be things being thrown overboard at sea, but also nets. So large trawlers using nets to catch fish, and maybe some of the trawler net has broken off and it's remained in the sea. So that's just a way in which they can all get into our water and soils. And it starts off as a large piece of net, for example, from a fishing boat, but then it gets broken down over time and it goes to those tiny, tiny small pieces that are 5 millimeters in diameter. And then they barely ever get broken down. So even though they're very hard to see from the naked eye, they are still there. So it's thought that about 910,000 tonnes of plastic waste is released onto land in the UK, which is a phenomenal number. And it's about 23 times more than what's deposited at sea. So a lot of people think that the plastic being dumped in our seas is the biggest issue, but actually it's what's being released onto our land, which is causing more damage. So just some questions and answers about the impacts of microplastics. So first one, are humans exposed to microplastics? So yes, we as humans, we are exposed to microplastics. They're present throughout the environment and can be passed up the food chain. So it's known that we're exposed to them through either our diet, maybe it's household contamination, or the air we breathe. And that can be how we then ingest microplastics. So obviously not ideal, but sometimes we're just not aware of that contamination that is taking place, which is why it's really important that we start to cut down our use of plastic and recycle it where possible. But I'll go into a bit more of that in a few slides. So then, is ingestion harmful? So currently there's very little evidence of the impacts of humans ingesting microplastics. So the World Health Organization have called for further research. So hopefully we'll be able to understand a bit more about the effects of ingestion. So what action's currently being taken? So the UK, along with lots of other countries, have decided to remove microbeads from cosmetic products. So the UK did this in 2018. So this might be things like your face scrubs and in other cosmetic products, such as face washes as well. And the European Chemicals Agency wants to ban microplastics in the EU as a whole, which would in turn prevent around 400,000 tonnes of plastic waste being released into the environment over the next 20 years. So this will help ensure that less microplastics in the environment, then there's less waste being broken down and less leaching into our rivers, oceans and seas. So hopefully if that ban does come into place, that would help prevent that release. And just a bit about the fight against plastic pollution. So around 7 million coffee cups are thrown away in the UK every day, which is a huge number. So every time someone goes, if they're just using a disposable one, sometimes they say that they're recyclable, but often they have a plastic film on the inside, so they actually can't be recycled properly. So one way you could help prevent this is by taking your own reusable cup into the coffee shop. And that's a little spoiler for some of the tips that I'll be giving away later. But yes, 7 million coffee cups thrown away every day. So some of you may have seen this picture on the left here. It was on the front of a magazine from the National Geographic. So what it's depicting here is, if you look at the top, you might just think that's the tip of an iceberg. But if you look closely into the image, you can see that it's actually a plastic bag floating in the water. So it represents that obviously what we're seeing at the minute with plastic pollution is only just the tip of the iceberg. And the cause of plastic pollution is having a really harmful effect across our environment. So some examples of this are things like turtles eating plastic bags, thinking that they're jellyfish. Obviously, it's then getting stuck in their throat and then they're dying because of this. Plastic debris also getting lodged in our coral reefs. So this can affect the health of the reef because it can't breathe, function properly. So the plastic debris is kind of destroying those reefs. And then 78 million tons of plastic is produced globally, but only 2% is made from recycled material. So that's why it's really important to try and recycle our products where possible. But the main issue is the production of the plastic as a whole. As you can see, 2% is a tiny fraction. And as it says on the slide there, plastic is causing a huge decline in our wildlife and polluting our oceans. So I mentioned the turtles and the seabirds earlier. So yes, that's a bit about the fight against plastic pollution. So next we have got a slide about legislation. So what is the industry currently doing? So this slide is based on England, but similar legislation is in place in Wales and Scotland to help encourage the shift away from using certain plastic products. So in England, since October 2023, businesses are no longer able to sell, supply or offer certain single-use plastic items. So this could be things like plates, cutlery, polystyrene cups, polystyrene food containers, so used in takeaways, also trays and bowls as well. So there are some exemptions to this ban, but that's overall what the industry is trying to do. So then looking at it from a Compass perspective, so obviously supporting a more sustainable planet for our future generations is paramount to us at ESS, but also part of the wider Compass Group UK and Ireland community. And reducing single-use plastics is a large part of this. So 96% of disposable food service products have now switches which have been agreed to be recyclable, reusable, or fibre-based compostable where facilities are exist on site. So that's a huge step that we've made. And then because of the legislation that's come into date from the financial year 2019 to 2023, you can see on the screen there that we have removed 48.8 million pieces of plastic cutlery, 6.3 million plastic bottles, 1.4 million cans, and then 3.9 million sauce sachets as well. So that's just some of the work that we're doing. And then we've also been cutting down on cling film. So we have avoided 5,200 miles of cling film by reducing our usage by 31 tonnes in 12 months. And it's worth noting that 100% of the cling film that we do still use is now polyethylene cling film. So what can we do? So this slide will just take you through a couple options that you can be doing either on site or at home. So the first is to reduce. So where possible, we want to be trying to reduce problematic and also unnecessary single-use plastic and packaging where possible. So this could be on site or at home as well. We want to reuse where possible, so encourage the use of reusable or refillable containers and items instead of single-use plastic. So this could be in a mess, for example, asking people to bring in their own Tupperware or their own reusable, refillable container instead of taking a takeaway box. And that's just one step that we can do to help reuse. Then we've also got review. So we want to try and source alternative products made from either recycled plastic or sustainable fiber-based materials. So things like this could be paper, card, or wood, and then make sure that these are being recycled in the suitable way as well, which leads me on to the next point. So recycle. So obviously, where possible, we want to improve our collection of plastic recycling, but also other materials as well. So paper, card, yes, making sure that everything that can be recycled is recycled, and we're minimizing what goes to landfill. And lastly, the final point is all about education. So informing customers of changes that you've made, and also empowering them to reduce their plastic waste and recycle more, and also to remind them not to litter. So, as I've mentioned, a large issue is the leaching into our waterways and also soil. So, if we're littering, that's how this can happen. But if we're disposing of things appropriately, hopefully this can help to minimize that. So, all about education there. So, what things should we maybe be trying to ditch? So, gum. So, in the UK, supposedly 87% of our streets are stained with gum. Gum has pieces of is made up of plastics basically. So once it ends up on the pavement, this can contribute to the leaching as well. Also doesn't look nice, obviously, if people are throwing it on the ground. So yeah, gum is one thing to try and ditch. We've then got straws. So obviously single-use plastic straws are one of the items that are no longer being able to use. But even in bars and restaurants, sometimes they're using paper straws, which is obviously a better alternative. But can you go one step further and maybe bring your own reusable straw? Some places you can buy metal straws, or also the small fold-up straws, which easily fit in a pocket or in your bag. So you can always have a straw on the go and don't need to have to ask for a disposable one, essentially. Then glitter. So glitter is actually made up again of lots of little pieces of plastic, and can remain in our natural environments for many, many years. So even the biodegradable glitters will still take years to break down. So sadly, trying to avoid glitter is another option. We've then got moving away from our takeaway containers. So if you're going somewhere where you might not finish a meal, for example, if you're going to eat out, maybe take a Tupperware with you, or if you're going to a food stand, try and minimize the amount of takeaway boxes that you are using. As I mentioned, 7 million coffee cups are thrown away in the UK every year, so that's an easy one to perhaps try and ditch. Can you take your own flask, or if you're having a coffee in a shop, ask for it in a mug? And then lastly, plastic water bottles. Everyone, drinking water is really important, to make sure you remain hydrated. So bring your own water bottle and refillable bottle with you. Try to move away from buying single-use plastic water bottles. So then just some examples of swaps that you can make. So where possible, try and buy your fruit and vegetables not wrapped in plastic. So a lot of supermarkets now, it's the same price to buy loose carrots as it is to buy bagged carrots, things like that. So just when you're shopping, things to be mindful of there. And then if you are getting the loose fruit and vegetables, don't then reach for the plastic bag. Perhaps bring your own bag to put them in. And also when you weigh them on the weighing scales in the supermarkets, you don't need to put them in a bag. You can just put them on and then put them in your own bag afterwards. When you're shopping, try and carry a tote bag with you, or keep a small tote bag in your car, or recyclable bags in your car. Or you could also use cardboard boxes as well when you're doing your shop. So this will help reduce the number of plastic bags that end up in circulation. Another thing you can swap to is jarring your own foods. So can you go to a refillable shop and buy flour or oats kind of loose, and then you store them in your own jars and containers? It's a good way you can make your kitchen look really nice with it, and it's just another way that you can minimize that plastic packaging on food. Next, we have using your own flasks. I've mentioned this one a couple of times. A lot of flasks these days keeps food hot and also cold, so you can use them for your coffee, but also cold drinks, or you could put soup in them. So they're very versatile and good to have in your cupboard. Next, if possible, can you go back to using the milkman, using glass bottles instead of plastic for your milk? I know not everyone has access to this and the cost can be a bit more, but if you're able to, it's a good swap to be able to make. It's then just a little summary of some of the swaps that I've gone through, but also some of the swaps that I haven't. So instead of using cling film, can you use things like beeswax food wraps or aluminium foil? If you're using foil, make sure that you rinse it or wipe it down at the end before you recycle it, because anything that's got food waste or food deposit on it can't be recycled. Then tea bags. So a lot of tea bags do have plastics in them. So can you go for a loose leaf tea, or make sure that your tea bags that you're using are responsibly and sustainably sourced? Then we've got vegetables in packaging. So you can see on there, cauliflower, it's a prime example. It has leaves on the outside to protect it, so it doesn't really need that plastic packaging. So that's an easy one to be able to swap. And then you can take your own bag for life in which to take your shopping home in. You want to try and ditch plastic cups and straws, takeaway packaging, and also plastic bottles. And then where possible, to have your own metal straw, use reusable coffee cups, and also reusable metal bottles for your water, which will help keep your water nice and cool as well. So then just a little summary of what I've gone through today. So as we're aware, plastic pollution is a global issue which is affecting our ecosystems, which I've mentioned today with the leaching into our rivers and our oceans and also onto our land. And hardly any plastic is actually recycled. So we want to stop purchasing plastic as a whole. And if you do, make sure that you are recycling it, or the plastic you're purchasing can be recycled. And Compass Group, it's really at the forefront of the work that they're trying to do to ensure that more recycled materials are being used across its supply chain. So doing their bit where they can. We then went through the reducing, reusing, reviewing, recycling and educating. So in order to help reduce our plastic. And then I just spoke through lots of little swaps that can be made to reduce your impact on the environment. You don't need to do lots of things in one go. Could it be that instead of buying a water bottle or a bottle of water every day, you take your own water bottle with you? Or instead of using takeaway containers, you take your own Tupperware, or perhaps you'll swap to purchasing fruit and vegetables, which isn't in plastic. So all of those little swaps can help you reduce your impact on the environment. So just before we go to any questions, I just thought I would show you this. So this is myself and my manager, Leanne. So we are the ESS Nutrition and Wellbeing team. We have our email, which is on the screen there, where you can ask us any personal questions. Maybe you don't want to ask a question at the end of this session. You're able to book specific talks and sessions for us to come onto unit, or we can also do these virtually if required. We can also support things like health fairs and unit meetings as well. We've then got our seasonal wellness magazine. So all of you that have received the invite for the webinar today will be receiving our wellness magazine. So these are produced seasonally throughout the year. Hot off the press is that our summer issue should be coming out later this afternoon. So keep your eyes on your inbox for that, for tips on staying safe in the sun, sustainable barbecue options, and how to make sure that you stay hydrated in the hot weather, which hopefully is coming. And then thank you to everyone who has joined the webinar today. For those colleagues or friends that you know couldn't make it, you can remind them that these get uploaded onto our YouTube channel. So you can just search for We Are ESS on there and they get updated. And there's also a whole host of different topics which we've covered. So it's worth looking back on. Even this year, we've covered men's health, digestive health, and also heart health as well. So lots of different topics for you to go and learn about. So what I will do is I will just come back to the screen and we'll just see if there are any questions. So, someone has asked a question about what it's best to do with glitter and other single use plastics that they already have at home. Should they be using them or not? I would say if you've already got them at home, you should use them because otherwise, if you don't, it's a real waste. Things like glitter, just make sure that you're not washing them down the sink when you take them off. Um, Try and wipe them away and dispose of them in the bin so that they're less likely to get into into the waterways and then the leaching that I've been talking about. So yes, if you have already got some at home, I would advise that you use them, but just refrain from buying them anymore. And maybe some of them you're able to repurpose as well. So yes, thank you very much for that question. Hopefully you've all learnt something today. And again, if you do have any questions, do feel free to drop us an email, and we should be able to help you or guide you to some resources. So thank you everyone for joining today, and hopefully see you again next month. Thanks very much.